Time for another breakdown of the top performing and most popular decks in Marvel Snap. Before I dive into the details, though, I'd just like you to know it's not all in your head. According to the early untapped metrics post over the air update, Alioth is currently seeing an almost 30% play rate with strong performance metrics, and Professor X is accompanying it at similar rates at almost 25% inclusion in decks towards the top of the ladder and inside of Infinite. Let's go ahead and break down what all this sticky prison mess looks like. One of the most popular decks towards the top of the Marvel Snap ladder right now is leveraging our latest season pass card, Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel's effect of getting additional stats into adjacent lanes makes her really strong in these lockout style decks. So we're going to see a number of highlighted today. Your flooded from the storm or your completely locked out path by Professor X can get boosted by Miss Marvel in your central location, so you can then guarantee a win in one spot to then follow up with Alioth, one of the most powerful 6-drops that's popular as well in Marvel Snap right now, getting you a fairly deterministic victory. In addition to these traditional single lane lockouts followed up by Alioth on turn 6, this deck list is also leveraging Legion to be able to duplicate our flooded location to end the game a full turn early. Essentially, you storm on turn 4 and then you Legion that storm path on turn 5, making it so all 3 locations close up. And then we have cards like Nebula that continue to grow on that last turn, as well as Nightcrawler and Jeff that can slide around the board, setting up a deterministic victory, leaving your opponent the only option of retreating. Our next most popular deck at the top of the Marvel Snap ladder and untapped metrics right now is another Professor X Alioth Lockout Prison deck featuring Sandman as a way to make sure people can't play to the board in the final turns of the game in any way that makes too much power. Miss Marvel is effectively a cheaper card that allows this deck to have a meaningful play early in the games where they don't have Electro or Wave to accelerate into their powerful 5 and 6 energy plays ahead of curve. Miss Marvel also makes an additional way for this deck to play to all 3 lanes simultaneously, making it so that once they have that lock with Sandman, other decks that aren't set up to play to all the lanes simultaneously have a hard time keeping up if they weren't already incredibly ahead. Similar to the lockout deck we saw before this one, this deck also gains a good bit of strength from the kind of shell game mini game it plays on the final turn, which is asking your opponent the question, can you beat my Alioth? If yes, can you also beat my Doctor Doom? And then this one even goes so far as to mix in a third 6-drop in Orca that makes it pretty difficult to impossible for your opponent to play around all 3, generally leaving them in a coin flip style situation at best. The third most popular deck at the top of the ladder right now, according to Untapped Stats, is none other than the High Evolutionary Hulk Infinite mashup. This deck list, for those not familiar, looks to set up Sunspot along with Evolved Misty Knight and Cyclops as early cards that allow you to gain advantage from passing with unused energy. It then utilizes magic to create Limbo, adding a 7th turn to the game, so you can then pass on turn 6 to allow She-Hulk to become completely free, so you can play her alongside either regular Hulk or Infinite on the final turn of the game for a big swing. Because this deck list is so dependent on getting to that turn 7 to pull this big combo off, it's also playing Leech as a way to attack the opponent's hand going into that 6th turn, so that way they can't have something like Storm or Legion to take your extra turn off the table. Honestly, Leech might be the good guy of today's best decks video, which is maybe an indictment of the format that we're going over, but we'll get to more of that at the end today. Moving along from our most popular decks to the top performing decks in the format, we have classic Sauron Shuri still showing up and punching the clock to go to work. Notable this week that the top performing Shuri decks so far in the format mostly seem to be featuring a copy of Alioth as a 6 energy play. I assume this is mostly a testament to the fact that this deck is pretty good at grabbing priority early, and then if you're the good guy with the Alioth, you could stop the bad guy with the Alioth. Is Shuri the good guy now? Is Leech the good guy? Okay, we got more decks to get through. No existential crisis yet. More on that at the end of the video. Next on the top performing decks is the Movers list. That's basically Marvel Snap's version of a shell game. We have Nightcrawler, Jeff, and Vision that can all move on the final turn of the game. You mix in Iron Lad, occasionally hitting one of these cards as well. Silk bouncing around the board depending on if you play to her path or not. And then Alioth as well as Doctor Doom at the top end. And it's generally speaking very hard for any opposing deck to ever have a deterministic win against you. That being said, it's also kind of hard to have deterministic wins against your opponent if you're someone that's into flipping coins on turn 6 to try and figure out who's going to win the game. This deck list is certainly an excellent choice for doing that, and it has the metrics to back it up. Moving along to the next top performing Marvel Snap deck, we have everybody's favorite Galactus putting up strong metrics as this format develops, with Mobius still being solidly out of commission despite being reverted to an ongoing. Wave is free to run around and accelerate you into your 6 energy plays. Because of Wave's increased stat line to a 3/5, she's arguably better in Galactus now than she was previously because she helps you jockey for priority going into that turn for Galactus to blow away your opponent's board without counterplay. As we've often seen with Galactus builds in the past, this deck is not simply a one-trick pony. In addition to the deck's namesake, you can also accelerate into a Professor X to lock your opponent out and then follow up a second path win with either Alioth blowing away their final turn play or Orca providing a massive pile of stats all on his own. Our perhaps bastion of hope at the end of the Alioth-filled tunnel is none other than format staple Zabu Darkhawk, still trucking along, especially with the addition of our latest season pass card, Miss Marvel. The big thing Miss Marvel does for this archetype, in addition to being another powerful 4 energy play, is that she's another ongoing card that you don't mind copying with Mystique. This deck always wished it could play Mystique as an additional copy of Darkhawk in the right situations, but it was just more of a risk than a potential benefit when you didn't have another worthwhile card to copy. Being able to go Miss Marvel into Mystique on the final turn of the game with Zabu's cost reduction is quite strong in this deck to swing a game, just like getting Darkhawk in 2 paths is. Notable that this build is also playing Cosmo because there are a number of people running around in the format right now looking to interact with your ongoing effects, and Cosmo is an excellent way to protect them. While this particular build that I have here that is my personal favorite of this archetype is not playing Alioth, it is also worth noting that some gamers are cutting Doctor Doom for Alioth as their 6-drop of choice, and other more greedy players are playing both at the top end, since more big 6 energy plays makes your Iron Lad even more potent. Close out the deck list portion of today's video. As always, I have a couple of pocket picks that are some off-meta things that I personally have enjoyed some success with so far in this developing format. The first of these is a Zabu Werewolf by Night kind of good stuff deck. Jessica Jones got buffed in the recent over-the-air update to be a 4/9 now when she triggers, and Rescue has always been a 4/9, but most importantly, neither of these cards die to Shang-Chi after his recent update. We combine these cards with an efficient on-reveal disruptive bottom end, Spider-Ham, Iceman, Snowguard, Juggernaut, and Storm to flip our werewolf around the board so we can build up its stat line while also disrupting what the opponent has going on. While I'm not going to say that this is the best deck in the format, I do think that the tools that it has allow it to be competitive with good play into the other top decks that I've listed in this video. My second pocket pick and our final deck list today is an oldie but a goodie with Moon Girl Clutter. This deck has things like Viper, Black Widow, Debris, and Green Goblin to junk up our opponent's side of the board, restricting exactly where they're able to play, while the stats that we're putting into play to actually win the game come on the back of the deck's namesake, Moon Girl, duplicating low-cost, high-power cards like Titania, Hood's Demon, and She-Hulk, so we can play those out on the final turn of the game to overwhelm our opponent. One card I'd like to call out in this deck that I think is key is Daredevil. While his visual is a little bit bugged right now, you can't always make out exactly what your opponent is playing. Knowing where they're playing provides a lot of value, not only with our own clutter cards locking our opponents out, but also letting us know if our opponent's going to play a tech card like Mobius, for example, that could disrupt our She-Hulk soaking energy, or being aware of where our control opponents are going to be deploying a Professor X so we can position ourselves in the best way possible against those. Armor is also crucial in this deck to make sure we not only don't die to tech cards like Killmonger, but it also lets us set up a path where we don't have to worry about an Alioth blowing away our plays on the final turn of the game. Finally, I'd like to close out today's video not talking about a specific deck list, but providing some insight how, from my perspective, we ended up at the position that we're currently in of this Professor X and Alioth dominated format. First things first, it's worth pointing out that, as I expected, Mobius being returned to his ongoing effect, but with a 3/3 stat line now, basically had a non-impact in the format. She-Hulk deck is the third most popular deck, as I highlighted in this video. It has very strong performance metrics, and Mobius isn't rising up to knock that card down. Mobius was already seeing declining play rates as a 2/3, and playing a 3/3 has a real cost, especially when a lot of strategies are looking to start executing their own game plan starting on the third turn of the game, and Mobius's effect, especially when it has counterplay to it in cards like Rogue and Enchantress, just isn't strong enough to justify putting in most Marvel Snap decks. As for how this very prison-centric metagame that we're currently waist deep in came about, I think there's three primary contributing factors to that. The first is that Miss Marvel, our current season pass card release, and she's a natural inclusion inside of these lockout decks thanks to her ability to add extra stats to a place where players typically can't play additional things into. Second is that we're coming off of a feature location, Project Pegasus, recently, which, by giving players 5 extra energy when it flipped up, really supercharged these Professor X and Alioth decks. While that feature location has now come and gone, what happens when we have something like that power up a deck archetype that's already pretty good is it reminds players how strong that deck can be, especially in the half of games that didn't involve Project Pegasus. So once they start playing that deck during the feature location, they keep playing it once it's over because they're still winning a lot with it, because ultimately it was always a good deck that they just didn't realize was strong previously. Finally, the third thing contributing to the current format, in my opinion, is the fact that Alioth is back in Spotlight caches this week. This card has basically always been strong, even after they nerfed it from 5 power down to 3, and now it's strong and way more players have access to it as they open their boxes this week, meaning that the decks that are playing this strong card are more accessible to more players, resulting in a higher play rate yet again. To wrap things up, as always, if you enjoy my musings on this topic, be sure to snap that like button. I'd also appreciate feedback in the comments down below as to whether or not you enjoyed my breakdown of how we got to where we're currently at after the deck list. Or would you prefer that I keep these videos shorter and more concise, talking just about the decks and the cards inside of them? As always, make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well. You got all the way through to the end of this video, so you probably enjoyed a good bit of it, and we'd love to see you back again here for some more Marvel Snap content here on YouTube.